All right, let's just bring you up to speed with some of the latest lines that was brought to us a short while ago by our correspondent Hani Mahmoud in Gaza, that the Nasser hospital in Gaza has now been stormed by Israeli forces. This was after it was shelled. And of course, all of this happening as the world awaits for an anticipated Israeli ground offensive into Rafah, one that's prompted warnings from several countries, including now Australia, New Zealand and Canada. Well, to discuss this more, Antony Loewenstein joins us. He's a journalist and author of The Palestine Laboratory, a book on Israel's arms and surveillance industry. Joins us now from Sydney. Good to have you with us, Antony. So just to give some background to my first question, we had on January the 28th, 11 cabinet ministers attend an event advocating the repopulation of Gaza with Israeli settlers and the departure of Gazans. Are the concerns that Israel actually wants to displace and not just evacuate Gazans valid? When you look at that, you look at the statement by the Israeli finance minister on December the 31st, where he was quoted as saying Gazans should be encouraged to emigrate.
I mean, the short answer is yes, and that's just not really an opinion. It's based on Netanyahu down, countless Israeli ministers, and I might add, a large swathe of the Israeli Jewish public, that there's really an intention here to make Gaza so unlivable, which essentially is what it's become in vast parts of Gaza, that really Palestinians have little choice. Now, the question is, of course, where do they go? And Israel has been trying for months to negotiate some kind of deal, which essentially means bribing them with money and arms, to various nations, including Egypt, other neighbours and countries further afield. And I read in the last 24 hours, though it's not confirmed, that there's talk about some kind of Egyptian-built buffer zone of sorts between, in the Sinai essentially, between Gaza and Egypt. Now, that suggests some kind of possible movement, and ultimately Egypt can be bought, because Egypt receives huge amounts of money every year from the US, and Israel is a close ally of Egypt. And the siege on Gaza for years has been imposed by Egypt and Israel. So this is a really deep concern, and I feel like too much of the world does not take that threat seriously.
Antony, I spoke to a doctor yesterday in Gaza who was talking to me about how they haven't received the usual supplies in a while. Is the disruption of food and medicine linked to what you're talking about?
There's a long history of this. You know, at the beginning of the Israeli and Egyptian imposed siege in 2007, there was literally a document that was leaked a few years after that said that Israel was trying to put Palestinians in Gaza on a diet. That's their words. And they were very careful how many calories in food was transported into Gaza. The people would not starve to death, but they would not get particularly more calories than is required to not die. This is the level of dehumanization that exists within the Israeli government. This, of course, was a government of many, many years ago. The current situation is that there are serious threats of huge amounts of people starving, mass disease, again, not my opinion, based on every single human rights organization, both in Gaza and those who report nearby. This is a real threat, and the idea that there is not massive, unrelenting pressure on Israel, not just to end the war, but to take food into Gaza, to get trucks into Gaza. I mean, I have friends in Gaza, in Rafah, who have regularly spoken to me or been in touch in the last months, really since October, but particularly in the last few weeks, who are not starving to death, but they find it unbelievably hard to find food. There is no food. There's not enough food. How is this not becoming one of the great scandals of our time? It clearly should be.
Right. Antony, does the investigation by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, published on February the 4th, indicate as well that the Israeli military uses or has used psychops as part of their policy to achieve their goals?
One of the things that's been very clear for the Israeli military strategy, if you can call it that, since October 7, is they realised pretty quickly that they were on the back foot, that although there was some global sympathy after October 7 and the attacks by Hamas, that quickly switched after Israel's unrelenting massacres in Gaza. So what they started doing is running very, very graphic Telegram, the messaging app groups, distributing huge amounts of gory images of dead Gazans to huge amounts of Israelis. There are huge amounts of other Telegram groups that I've seen just circulated by Israelis themselves with hundreds of thousands of followers, which literally just shows dead and killed Palestinians. And that's within Israel. Globally, there is growing evidence, which I've documented and others have as well, of Israeli-led disinformation campaigns. We hear a lot in the West about Russia and China spreading disinformation and election meddling, which is true. We hear far less about what Israel is doing, both within its own country and far wider. This is a threat because we don't really know exactly often the source of it beyond, and this was in Haaretz recently, as you rightly say, Sammy, that Israeli military realizes they have lost the information war, not losing, lost. And the way they're trying to challenge that is to spread huge amounts of disinformation about Hamas, about Palestinians, about the fact that every Palestinian in Gaza allegedly is a threat or is a terrorist. I mean, it's stuff that people are not buying. So that really is a problem, and I think it needs to be far greater examined than it has been.
All right, thanks so much, Antony Loewenstein.